Jesus Chuy Garcia is a dynamic and progressive leader who has fought to improve the lives of neighbors on the southwest side of Chicago and the neighboring Cicero and Berwyn communities. First elected to the Chicago City Council in 1986 as a reformer and supporter of Mayor Harold Washington. Emigrating with his parents from Durango, Mexico at the age of 10, Jesus Garcia has lived since then in the communities of Pilsen and Navillita. After earning a BA in political science from the University of Illinois at Chicago, he went on to acquire a master's degree in urban planning. In '92, Jesus Garcia was elected and served 2 terms as a state senator as the first ever Mexican-American elected to the state senate. Chuy pushed forward a broad range of legislation to benefit the working families of his district. Please help me welcome Jesus Garcia.
It's a good thing I trimmed my mustache a little bit this morning. It was a light trim. It's graying more and more, so I have to trim it more and more. It's not size, it's other aesthetics, or lack thereof. I'm delighted to... Gray is beautiful, yes. I feel it every day. Every time I see a new streak, yes. I'm delighted to be here today, and I want to thank Latinos Progresando for everything they do. The advancement of the Mexican-American community is at the heart of their mission, their struggle for Latino empowerment and dignity. And I have to say, particularly their ability to mine history and culture and put it on the stage in the form of experimental theater, teatro americano. They make you cry, they make you laugh, they make you think that maybe you ought to be up on the stage, right? Because they're talking about you as they perform. So thank you for everything that you do, and hopefully you'll have a very successful fundraiser tonight too. As someone who comes from the nonprofit sector, I know how important that is. So I used up 2 minutes already. Now the clock is really ticking. I wanted to talk a little bit about the local scene and how we're faring. Not to issue a report card, because I issue those pretty frequently, particularly at campaign time, and I usually get in trouble. I stir up animosity, sometimes some hatred from some of the folks that have been practicing especially traditional politics, the Chicago tradition of politics. But I think I also managed to stir up newcomers, people who are questioning politics, the power arrangement, and our lack of representation, our lack of achieving a greater degree of clout that is more commensurate with the growing population and the force that we're supposed to be. I'm really glad that this forum is discussing history, migration, a little bit later business, demographics. I know Silvia will be here to chime in on that. The arts, and lastly, politics. My job is to deal with the last one. I almost wish I were last so that I could talk about how all these other things influence and impact and determine what happens in politics. You know, anytime you talk about politics in Chicago, or for that matter anywhere in the country, you have to recall significant things that people have said about politics. And one of my favorites is Frederick Douglass, when he said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." That is certainly true all over the country, for that matter in the world, and certainly in Chicago. My own political history was related to you in the introduction. Left out a small but important piece, and that was that I was first elected to the office of ward committeeman, a party position, in 1984. I was all of 26 or 27 years old then. I wasn't supposed to win that race. It was, I believe, a 5-way race, but I carved enough votes to give me a majority through a progressive coalition in the little village 22nd Ward community that was sort of the start of my career, if you can call it that, in the political realm of Chicago politics. Let me jump to today, and then I will backtrack and relay to you a little bit of history in Chicago so that we sort of take stock of how we are faring politically in this community. Much has been said, particularly in the mainstream media, about the Latino vote and its impact on the 2012 elections, the re-election of Barack Obama. Approximately, according to the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, 11 million Latinos voted. It wasn't the most impressive showing, but certainly the largest one, but the increase wasn't very impressive, not for all the fanfare that we got. The statistic that should sober one up is the fact that in that election, 12 million Latinos did not vote. So more did not vote than voted, according to what's on the voting rolls. The president was reelected. I think members of Congress took note of the growing potential of our community, as did local and state office holders. Immigrants in that election have proven to be more motivated and mobilized than the longer time Latinos in the country, which is a serious challenge that we've got to figure out how to overcome if we're going to wield more political influence. And I'd like to believe that part of the success and the recognition that came in the 2012 general election stems from Chicago's role as a leader in the the movement for comprehensive immigration reform, where Chicago played a leading role throughout the last 8 years in the movement for comprehensive immigration reform and the turnout of the fall, although not stellar, are important things that influence the very fact that it forced Congress and the White House to engage in the debate around comprehensive immigration reform. We don't know what the outcome of that will be. There's lots of work to do, but it's very important. Now let me go back in time to what has happened in Chicago. Up until 1983, when Latinos ran for at least 4 wards for aldermen in the city of Chicago, coinciding with the candidacy of Harold Washington, we didn't fare very well in that year. When a federal lawsuit was brought about challenging the city's ward map, by 1986, when the lawsuit was settled, it was a lawsuit involving African American and Latino plaintiffs contesting the map. Under Harold Washington's tenure, Latinos in 1986 made very important breakthroughs in electing 4 Latino aldermen to the Chicago City Council. In 1987, when Harold Washington ran for re-election, he ran with a Latina as a running mate for the office of city clerk. And the 80s turned out to be a very important decade that opened up doors for Latinos and Latinas to get elected to city council, to the state legislature, and it really set up the possibility of electing our first congressman, Latino congressman from Illinois in 1982. This was a very important administration in the city's history because of its commitment to empowerment of racial minorities, its inclusion of women, other ethnic groups who had not been on the inside in terms of city hall politics, etc. How have we fared since then? We have elected people as a result of successful redistricting, the role of the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund in crafting maps that reflected the population, that leveled the playing field, created districts that gave a real possibility to electing people who had a real shot, meaning Latinas and Latinos. throughout the 90s and in the first decade of the 21st century. So as a result of that, a Latino caucus was formed in Springfield. There's a Latino caucus in the Chicago City Council. There are 2 representatives on the Cook County Board of Commissioners. However, and this is really important to note, there are still several legislative districts in the State House, one in the Senate, one on the north side, at least 3 suburban districts that are Latino majorities that we have yet to elect a Latina or a Latino to those offices. That's very important to note because it really sheds light on the fact that we have not developed the resources or the tools to effectively engage the populace and the voters to register all of the potential people who are eligible to vote in elections to vote, and then to get out, particularly in primary contests. Illinois being, a heavily blue state, and the metro region becoming increasingly Democratic, both in the city and in the inner ring suburbs, means that whoever wins the primary election is in fact the next legislative representative of that district. Our community doesn't understand that. They still tend to vote largely in presidential elections, sometimes in lower numbers in gubernatorial or statewide contests, but we still can't appreciate the importance of local elections. The same is true in trustee races, in city council races throughout the suburban areas in the metro region. It is very important, particularly as the 2015 elections near, that there will be some ample new opportunities to elect more young Latino women and men to the city council on the north side and on the south side. I can count at least 5 or 6 new wards that will become majority Latino. And remember that those legislative districts where we were not able to elect people in the primary and the elections last year, those will come up again. Why do I mention that? Because our numbers will only increase in those legislative districts that were 50, 55, 60, 65% Latino. They will inch up, will have better prospects for electing people. My time's almost up. Okay, let me say a couple of more things. How did I know that? I think that what will be key to how effective we become in wielding our numbers will be crafting a message that will resonate with longer term residents, Mexican Americans particularly, people who may not be as close to the immigration cause as many of us are. Crafting a message and being able to deliver it to a doorstep, either through direct mail, with better political cadre, skilled political workers, particularly young people. I think we need very, very urgently. If not, change is going to come about way too slowly. We've got to figure out, and I know that Gary Chico will talk about contributing to political causes, political actions committee. How do we tap the tremendous potential of the Mexican American community? Because if you look at all the commercial strips throughout the metro region that are Latino, it's the Mexican American community that's been growing by leaps and bounds, particularly in small business. How do we get them to contribute? How do we create a culture of giving for political causes? I could talk, for a half hour about why that may not exist currently, but it becomes critical. And lastly, I think the fact that people like Gary Chico and Senator Miguel del Valle ran for mayor 2 years ago is another impetus. It's another barrier that has been broken because they said, why not? Some people said, well, you got to wait because you haven't proven yourself. And they said, no, we're going to do it now. It would have been very interesting if only one of them had run. What might have happened 2 years ago, but we'll be faced with that same prospect in 2015 and thereafter, and the potential for really changing the city council and the legislative race. I promise this is my last sentence. So, how have we fared in politics? I think we've only scratched the surface of the political realm in the country and locally. and the best of all of the progress that is to come comes in the next decade and two. Thank you very much.
Just to follow up on your remarks, well, we might experience, or we are experiencing increased growth in the Latino, specifically the Mexican community. How optimistic do you feel that that will actually translate into increased political representation in office?
You know, the numbers are very impressive, but when you look at our ability to elect people, it's a very challenging reality. Unless we figure out a better message that connects with a broader segment of the population, especially those who are eligible to vote, we're not going to make progress. I'm, tearing my brain out to figure out what that is, but I think that it will take people from all walks of life, from different perspectives, to figure out how to better communicate such a message in a more effective